Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, today we are going to look at chapter 8. The topic will cover about this entrepreneurial strategy and competitive dynamic. The learning objective of this chapter, hopefully after listen to this video, you will have a better understanding on the following point: the roles of opportunities and resources, as well as the entrepreneurs in successfully pursuing new ventures, the three types of entry strategy. Try to get to know to the pioneering strategy, imitative strategy, and adaptive strategy, which the commonly used to launch a new venture. And we also are going to look at the generic strategies of overall cost leadership, differentiation, and focus are used by new ventures and small businesses. Right, and we're going to study about how the competitive actions, such as the new entry of new competitors into a marketplace, may launch a cycle of action and reaction among close competitors. And finally, we are going to look at the components of the competitive dynamics analysis, which are new competitive action, trade analysis, motivation and capability to respond, and types of competitive action, and likelihood of the competitive reaction. In this chapter, we will address the entrepreneurial strategies. The previous chapters actually focus primarily on the business level and corporate level strategies, and the international strategies will not be covered in our syllabus. So here actually we ask about the strategies of those entering into a market or industry for the first time. Alright, so in this chapter, we focus on strategic entrepreneurship, where the action firms take to create new ventures in the market. Right, where in chapter 12 we focus on a related issue, where how established firm can build or reinforce an entrepreneurial mindset as they strive to be innovative in market in which the firms already competes. Actually, companies wishing to launch new ventures must also be aware that, consistent with the 5 bosses model, as we discussed in chapter 2, right, the new entrants, for example, are the threat to existing firms in an industry. So entry into a new market arena is intensely competitive from the perspective of incumbents in that arena. So I think due to that, the new entrant can nearly always expect a competitive response from other companies in the industry that they are entering. So knowledge of the competitive dynamic that are at work in the business environment is an aspect of entrepreneurial new entry that will be addressed later in this chapter. So maybe before we moving on, it is important to highlight the roles that entrepreneurial startups and small businesses play in entrepreneurial value creation. So small businesses, those defined as having maybe 500 employees or fewer, create about 65% of all new jobs. This data is actually related to the United States, as mentioned in the textbook, and also generate 13 times as many new patents per employee as larger firms. Recognizing entrepreneurial opportunities. Alright, entrepreneurship actually refer to new value creation. Even though these entrepreneurial activities is usually associated with startup companies, new value can be created in many different contexts, including startup ventures, major corporation, family-owned businesses, non-profit organization, established institutions. For an entrepreneurial venture to create new value, the three factors that must present here is an entrepreneurial opportunity, the resources to pursue the opportunity, and entrepreneurial team willing and able to undertake the opportunities. So the entrepreneurial strategy that an organization uses will depend on these three factors, which is beyond merely identifying a venture concept. The opportunity recognition process also involves organizing the key people and resources that are needed to go forward. As stated in the page 238, if you look at your textbook, all right, the exhibit 8.1 shows the three factors that are needed to successfully proceed, which are the opportunity, resources, and entrepreneurs. This is the entrepreneurial opportunity analysis framework, which consists opportunity, resources, and the entrepreneur. The entrepreneurial opportunity recognition. Right, the starting point for any new ventures is the presence of an entrepreneurial opportunity. So where do opportunities come from? For new business startup, opportunities normally come from many sources, whether it is a current or the past work experience, hobbies that grow into businesses or lead to invention, maybe the suggestions by your friends or family members, or a chance event that makes an entrepreneur aware of an unmet needs. Okay, so the ideas that you get from surrounding, okay, creates the opportunities. All right, so maybe it comes from the established firms. New business opportunity come from the needs of existing customers, maybe suggestions by the supplier, or maybe due to the technological development that lead to the new advances. So for all firms, there is a major overarching factors behind all viable opportunities that emerge in the business landscape, which is change. Now, where change actually creates opportunity. Change creates opportunities, and entrepreneurial firms make the most of changes brought about by new technology, socio-cultural trend, and shift in consumer demand. So how do changes in the external environment lead to new business creation? We have learned about this in our chapter 2 about the external environment, why we need to look at our external environment in order for us to create new business. So this spark creative new ideas and innovation. A business people often have ideas for entrepreneurial ventures. However, not all such ideas are good ideas. So we have to look and study carefully before we venture into that business. So what we call it is a viable business opportunities. So to determine which ideas are strong enough to become new ventures, the entrepreneur must go through a process of identifying, selecting, and developing the potential opportunities, where this is called the opportunity recognition. All right, so the opportunity recognition refer to more than just the eureka. All right, so actually the feeling that people sometimes experience at the moment they identify a new idea. Okay, we have to look at the importance of this opportunity. The opportunity recognition process will involve two phases of activity. One is the discovery, and the second one is the evaluation, where this lead to the viable new ventures opportunities. All right, so we will discuss in more detail about this discovery and evaluation in the next slide. Discovery phase refer to the process of becoming aware of a new concept. Many entrepreneurs report that their idea for a new venture occurred to them in an instant. All right, often that based on their prior knowledge, they gave them an idea for a new business. So the discovery of a new opportunity is often spontaneous and unexpected actually. All right, for example, we can look at Starbucks case. Okay, Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, during his time in Milan, Italy, he suddenly realized that the coffee and conversation cafe model that was common in Europe, and maybe this will work in the United States as well. So according to Howard, he didn't need to research to find out if American would pay $3 for a cup of coffee. Okay, Starbucks was actually just a small business at the time, but Howard began literally shaking with Simon about growing it into a bigger business. All right. And you may refer to your text where the Spotlight 8.1 discuss about these two brothers, how they managed to perform well in the Starbucks business. Right, this and the opportunity discovery also may occur as the results of deliberate search for new ventures, opportunity, or creative solution to business problems. Okay, so viable opportunity often emerge only after a concerted effort. All right, the search process is very similar to a creative process, which may be unstructured. All right, and but eventually lead to a practical solution or business innovation. All right, this to stimulate the discovery of new opportunities, company often encourage creativity, encourage out of the box thinking, and also brainstorming. So while deliberate search can aim to identify three novel and create entrepreneurial opportunities, I think it can also be more focused to look for obvious opportunities that others have failed to see. All right, so the experienced entrepreneur discussing ways to look for new entrepreneurial opportunities identify several ways to undertake a structured search for entrepreneurial ideas. For example, look at what's bugging you. So what are the frustration you have with current product or processes? And after that, search for ideas on how to address the annoyances to identify the entrepreneurial opportunities. All right, and maybe you also have to talk to the people who knows about this. If you have a general idea of the market you want to go to, you may talk to the suppliers or to the customers and frontline workers in this market. This discussion will help you to insight on how these stakeholders' needs are not being met and can also open avenues to hear what they would like to see in new product and processes. All right, and look to other market as well. One of the most powerful way of finding new ideas is by borrowing ideas from other markets, and this could involve looking at other industries or other geographic markets to identify new ideas. All right. Another thing is get inspired by the history. Right, sometimes the best ideas are not actually new ideas. Opportunity in industries can often be discovered by looking to the past to find good ideas that have slipped out of practice but might now be valued by the market again. Right. That's a few ways how you can identify the business opportunities. Evaluation phase. Opportunity evaluation actually which occurs after an opportunity has been identified. It would involve analyzing an opportunity to determine whether it is viable and strong enough to be developed into a full-fledged new venture. Right, so the ideas developed by new product groups or in brainstorming session are tested actually by various methods, including talking to potential target customers and discussing the operational requirements with the production or logistic managers. So a technique that known as feasibility analysis, for example, is used to evaluate this and other critical success factors. And this type of analysis often leads to the decisions that a new venture project should be discontinued. So, if the venture concept continues to seem viable, a more formal business plan may be developed. Right, among the most important factors to evaluate is the market potential for the product or service. Established firms tend to operate in established market, so they have to adjust to the market trend and to shift in consumer demand. So of course, but they usually have a customer base for which they are already filling a marketplace needs. So new ventures, in contrast, must first determine whether a market exists for the product or service they are contemplating. And a critical element of opportunity recognition is assessing to what extent the opportunity is viable in the marketplace. For an opportunity to be viable, it needs a few qualities. Okay, so we may look at these four qualities here, which are the attractive, achievable, durable, and the value creating. Attractive, for example, is actually the opportunity must be attractive in the marketplace, must be attractive in the market. That is there where it must be a market demand for that particular product or for that new product or new service. Where achievable, the opportunity must be practical and physically possible. All right, and durable, actually the opportunity must be attractive long enough for the development and deployment to be successful. That is the window of opportunity that must be open long enough for it to be worthwhile. It's not in a short-term period. Value creating, where the value creating here is the opportunity must be potentially profitable. Okay, and that's it. That is the benefit that must surpass the cost of development by a significant margin. All right, if a new business concept meet these criteria, or two other factors must be considered before the opportunity is launched as a business. So the resources available to undertake it and the characteristic of the entrepreneur to pursuing it. Uh, Okay, now we look at the entrepreneurial resources. Resources are an essential component of successful entrepreneurial launch. For startup, the most important resource is usually money, because a new firm typically has to expend substantial sums just to start the business. However, financial resources are not the only kind of resource a new venture needs. The human capital and social capitals are also important. So many firms also rely on government resources to help them thrive. Entrepreneurial financial resources. Right, the type of financial resources here may be needed depends or based on two factors. One is the stage of venture development and the scale of the venture. Right, entrepreneurial firms that are starting from scratch, which are known as startups, are at the earliest stage of development. So most startups also begin on relatively small scales. The funding available to young and small firms tend to be actually quite limited. So in fact, the majority of new firms are low budget startup launch with personal saving and the contributions of family and friends. Among firms included in the entrepreneur list of the 100 fastest growing new businesses. This example is come from the United States. The 61% reported that their startup fund came from personal savings. So I think although the bank financing, public financing, and venture capitalists are important sources of small business finance, this type of financial support are typically available only after a company has started to conduct business and generate a sales. The angel investor, for example, angel investor is a private individuals who provide equity investment for seed capital during the early stages of a new venture. So they favor company that already have a winning business model and dominance in a market niche. So some of reported in a press, for example, normally they talk about the venture capitalists and angel investors in startup firms. The majority of external funding for young and small firm basically come from informal sources such as family and friends. Once a venture has established itself as a going concern, other sources of financing become readily available. Banks, for example, are more likely to provide later stage financings to companies with a track records of sales or other cash generating activities. At both stages, 5% or less of the funding actually come from outside investors, such as angel investor or venture capitalists. Startup typically involve large capital investment or extensive development costs, such as manufacturing or engineering firms, which try to commercialize an innovative product, will have high cash requirement after they are founded. So since these investments are typically well beyond the capability of the entrepreneur or even a local bank to fund, entrepreneur running this firm turn to the venture capital market. So other firms turn to venture capitalists when they are on the brink of rapid growth. So venture capitalists is a form of private equity financing through which the entrepreneur raise money by selling shares in the new venture. So in contrast to this, what we call angel investors who invest their own money, venture capital companies are organized to place the fund of private investor into lucrative business opportunities. So venture capitalists, what we can see here, normally always have high performance expectation from the company they invest in. But they also provide important managerial advice and links to key contact in an industry. Right. And recently, a new source of funding, we call crowdfunding, has emerged as a means for startup to amass significant pools of capital. So in this peer-to-peer investment system, individuals normally striving to grow their business post their business ideas on a crowdfunding website. So the potential investor who go to the site, evaluate the proposal listed and decide which, if any, to fund. Typically, no individual makes a very sizable funding allotment. So most investors contribute up to a few $100s to any investment, but the power of the crowd is at work. So if a few thousand investors sign up for a venture, it can potentially raise over $1 million. So maybe the startup company can use crowdfunding techniques in order for them to proceed with the further investment or to continue their business. Human capital, social and governmental resources. Okay, under human capital, for example, we look at the bankers, venture capitalists, and angel investors agree that the most important asset an entrepreneurial firm can have is strong and skilled management. So, according to the Stephen Gore, this founder member of Walnut Venture Associate, venture investors do not invest in businesses. Instead, we invest in people, very smart people with very high integrity. So here, managers need to have a strong base of experience and extensive domain knowledge, as well as an ability to make rapid decisions and change direction as shifting circumstances may require. So in the case of startup, more is better. If you look at new ventures, they are started by a team of 3, 4, or 5 entrepreneurs. Actually are more likely to succeed in the long run if you compare to launch by a lone ranger. Right, so the ability of the firms to extend their human capital base to outside partners is an especially important skills in the gig economy. Platform firms in this market will only succeed if they can deliver gig workers who deliver a high quality service. The urban professionals who go to handy to find a contractor to do needed cleaning or painting, for example, will only return if the service provider follows through in a timely and professional ways. This is similar to the customer will only return to the fancy hands for personal assistant if their first experience with a fancy hands um, assistant is good. Right. Thus, platform firms in this market need to develop effective system to recruit and evaluate potential service provider. So on the positive side, a firm that use a gig economy model will greatly reduce the financial resources needed to expand their businesses. And if you look at the social capital, for example, here, new ventures founded by entrepreneurs who have extensive social contact are more likely to succeed than a venture started without the support of a social network. Okay, even though a venture may be new, if the founder have contact who will vouch for them, they can gain exposure and build legitimacy faster. This support can come from several sources. For example, your prior jobs, the industry organizations, local business groups such as the Chamber of Commerce, and these contact can all contribute to a growing network that provides support for the entrepreneurial firm. For example, the strategic alliance. Strategic alliance will represent a type of social capital that can be especially important to young and small firms. Strategic alliances can provide key avenue for growth by entrepreneurial firms. So, by partnering with other company, young or small firm can expand or give the appearance of entering numerous markets for handling a range of operations. So here are the few types of alliances that have been used to extend or strengthen the entrepreneurial firms. You may look at these in terms of technology alliances. Technology alliances, for example, the tech-savvy entrepreneurial firms often benefit from forming alliances with older incumbents. So the alliance allow the larger firms to enhance its technology capabilities and expand the revenue and reach of the smaller firm. While the manufacturing alliances, the use of outsourcing and other manufacturing alliances by small firms has grown dramatically in these recent years. Internet enabled capabilities such as collaborating online about delivery and design specifications have greatly, I think, simplified the doing business even with the foreign manufacturers. Right, and another one is the retail alliances, where the licensing agreements allow one company to sell the product and services of another in different markets, including overseas. So specialty product, the type sometimes made by entrepreneurial firms, often seems more exotic when sold in another country. All right. Although such alliance often sounds good, there are also potential pitfalls here. For example, lack of oversight and control is one pitfall of partnering with foreign firm. Problems with product, the quality, timely delivery, receiving payment can also sour an alliance relationship if it is not carefully managed, right? With technology alliances, there is a risk that big firms may take advantage of the technological know-how of their entrepreneurial partners. So, however, even with this potential problem, strategic alliances provide a good means for entrepreneurial firms to develop and grow. And other thing that we may look under the resources is the government resources. Okay, in Malaysia itself, we have the government support under the government contracting, loan, guarantee program, training, counseling, and support services. The government, for example, during the pandemic, they provide a lot of a kind of a loan to the SMEs, right, to support the uh, uh, to ensure the companies sustain during the difficult time. All right. Maybe the government also support in terms of the contract, what we can see here, government provide what we call government project to some of the companies. Entrepreneurial leadership, whether a venture is launched by an individual entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial team, effective leadership is needed. Launching a new ventures requires special kind of leadership, where through research indicates that entrepreneurs tend to have characteristics that distinguish them from corporate managers. The differences include what we call higher score self-evaluation, which is actually the successful entrepreneur evidence, higher level of self-confidence, and a higher assessment of the degree to which an individual controls his or her own destiny. Right, another point here, higher consciousness. Entrepreneurs tend to have a higher degree of organization, persistent, hard work, and pursuit of goal accomplishment. And another thing here, another difference, higher openness to experience. Entrepreneurs also tend to score higher on openness to experience, a personality trait associated with intellectual curiosity and a desire to explore novel ideas. Another point, higher emotional stability. Higher emotional stability here is to handle a higher ability to handle the ambiguity and maintain even emotion during stressful period, and they basically are less likely to be overcome by anxieties. And the last one is lower agreeableness. Finally, the entrepreneur tend to score lower on agreeableness. This suggests that they typically look out primarily for their own self-interest and also are willing to influence or manipulate others for their own advantage. Okay, we look at the three characteristics of the leaders, which is vision, dedication, and drive, and commitment to excellence. The three personality traits, they are embodied in the behavioral attributes necessary for successful entrepreneurial leadership, which are the visions, dedication, drive, and commitment to excellence. Vision is actually an entrepreneur most important asset. Entrepreneur envisions realities that do not yet exist, but without a vision, most entrepreneurs would never even get their venture off the ground. So with a vision, entrepreneurs are able to exercise a kind of transformational leaderships that create something new and in some way changes the world. Just having a vision, however, is not enough. Right? So the leaders need to develop support, get financial backing, and attract employees. The entrepreneurial leaders must share their vision with others, with the employees, or maybe the stakeholders of the companies. And if you look at the drive and dedication and drive are reflected in hard work. Drive involve internal motivation. So dedication calls for an intellectual commitment that keeps an entrepreneur going even in the face of bad news or poor luck. They both require patience, stamina, and a willingness to work long hours. However, I think a business built on this, what we call the heroic effort of one person, may suffer in the long run. So that's why the dedicated entrepreneur enthusiasm is also important. It is like a magnet. It attracts others to the business to help with the work. Right, and the final one is commitment to excellence, where excellence actually require entrepreneur to commit to knowing the customers, providing quality goods and services, paying attention to details, and continuously learning. All right, the entrepreneurs who achieve excellence are sensitive to how these factors work together. However, entrepreneur may founder if they think they are the only one who can create excellence results. So the most successful, by contrast, often report that they owe their success to hiring people smarter than themselves. Entrepreneurial strategy. Successfully creating new ventures requires several ingredients. There are three factors that are necessary. One is viable opportunities, sufficient resources, and a skilled and dedicated entrepreneur or entrepreneurial team. So once these elements are in place, the new venture needs a strategy. So in this section, we will consider several different strategic factors that are unique to new ventures, and also how the generic strategy that has been introduced in chapter 5 can be applied to these entrepreneurial firms. We are going to look also how this entrepreneurial strategy indicate how the combination strategies might benefit the entrepreneurial firms and address the potential pitfall associated with launching the new venture strategies. To be successful, new ventures must evaluate industry conditions, the competitive environment, and market opportunities in order to position themselves strategically. However, traditional strategy analysis may have to be altered somewhat to fit the entrepreneurial situation. For example, if we have learned about the five forces model, and the five forces analysis that has been discussed in chapter 2 is typically used by established firms. But it can also be applied to the analysis of new ventures to assess the impact of industry and competitive forces. So, how does a new entrant evaluate the trade of other new entrants? First, we can say that the new entrants need to examine the barrier to entry. So if the barriers are too high, the potential entrant may decide not to enter or to gather more resources before attempting to do so. Compared to an older firms with an established reputation and available resources, the barriers to entry may be insurmountable, low for an entrepreneurial startup if compared to the entrepreneurial startup. So therefore, understanding the force of this barrier is actually critical in making a decision to launch. The second factors that may be especially important to a young venture is the threat of retaliation by incumbents. In many cases, we can see entrepreneurial ventures are the new entrant that pose a threat to incumbent firms. Therefore, in applying the five process model to new ventures, the threat of retaliation by established firms need to be considered. And part of any decision about what opportunity to pursue is a consideration of how a new entrant will actually enter a new market. The concept of entry strategy here provide a useful means of addressing the types of choices that new venture have. Alright, so firms must choose how to compete. Okay, whether you have to consider the entry strategy or generic strategies or the combination strategies. Entry strategies. One of the most challenging aspects of launching a new venture is finding a way to begin doing business that quickly generate cash flows, build the credibility, attract good employees, and overcomes the liability of the newness. So the idea of an entry strategy or entry wage describes several approaches that firms may take to get a foothold in a market. So several factors that will affect this decision maybe is the product or the service, whether it is high tech or low tech, what resources that are available for the initial launch, what are the industries and competitive condition, what is the overall market potential, and does the venture founder prefer to control the business or to grow it. Right, we have a few choices in terms of the entry strategy here, where it is the choices includes pioneering new entry, imitative new entry, and adaptive new entry. Further elaboration on these three entry strategies will be explained in the following slide. Pioneering entry strategies. The new entrant with a radical new product or highly innovative service may change the way business is conducted in an industry. So this kind of breakthrough, creating new ways to solve old problems or meeting customers' needs in a unique new way, is referred to as a pioneering new entry. So if the product or service is unique enough, a pioneering new entrant may actually have little direct competition. The first personal computers was a pioneering product, and there had never been anything quite like it, and it's revolutionized computing. For example, the first internet browser provided a type of pioneering service. This breakthrough created whole new industries and changed the competitive landscape. And breakthrough innovations continue to inspire pioneering entrepreneurial efforts. The pitfall that associated with pioneering new entry numerous. For example, one of it is there is a strong risk that the product or service will not be accepted by the consumers, by your customers. All right. And the history of entrepreneurship is actually littered with new ideas that never got off the launching pad. All right. The pioneering new entry strategy actually is destructive to the status quo of an industry. It is likely based on a technological breakthrough. If it is successful, other competitors will rush into to copy it. This can create issues of sustainability for an entrepreneurial firm, especially if a larger company with greater resources introduces a similar product. So, for a new entrant to sustain its finery advantage, it may be necessary to protect its intellectual property, advertise heavily to build the brand recognition, and form alliances with businesses that will adopt its product or services and offer exceptional customer service. The imitative new entry. Whereas pioneers are often inventors or tinkerers with new technology, imitators usually have a strong marketing orientation. So they look for opportunities to capitalize on proven market successes. An imitative new entry strategy is used by entrepreneurs who see product or business concept that have been successful in one market niche or physical local and introduce the same basic product or service in another segment of the market. Sometimes the key to success with an imitative strategy is to fill a market space where the need had previously been filled in adequately. Alright, the entrepreneurs are also prompted to be imitators when they realize that they have the resources or skills to do a job better than an existing competitors. This can actually be a serious problem for entrepreneurial startup if the imitators is an established companies. Adaptive new entry. Most new entrant use strategy somewhere between the pure imitation and pure pioneering. So that is, they offer a product or service that is somewhat new and sufficiently different to create new value for customers and to capture market share. So such firms are adaptive in the sense that they are aware of marketplace condition and conceive entry strategy to capitalize on current trend. An adaptive new entry approach does not involve reinventing the wheel, nor is it merely imitative either. So it is actually involve taking an existing idea and adapting it to a particular situation. However, there are several pitfalls that might limit the success of an adaptive new entrant. First, the value proposition must be perceived as unique. Unless potential customers believe a new product or service does a superior job of meeting their needs, they will have little motivation to try it. Second, there is nothing to prevent a close competitor from mimicking the new firm's adaptation as a way to hold on to its customers. And the third one, once an adaptive entrant achieves initial success, where the challenge is to keep the idea fresh. If the attractive features of the new businesses are copied, the entrepreneurial firm must find ways to adapt and improve the product or service offering. That is where the innovation skill is needed actually in the company to ensure that the product is sustained and keep different from others. So considering these choices, an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial team might ask which new entry strategy is the best. Actually, the choices depends on many competitive, financial and marketplace considerations. Whether to be pioneering, imitative or adaptive, when the entry market is only one question the entrepreneur faces. A new entrant must also decide what type of strategic positioning that best work for them, right, as the business goes forward. So the strategic choices can be informed by the guidelines suggested for the generic strategies that we have learned earlier. Okay, here we look at these three generic strategies. One is overall core leadership, differentiation, and focus strategy. Overall cost leadership is one of the ways entrepreneurial firms achieve success is by doing more with less. So by holding down costs or making more efficient use of resources than larger competitors, new ventures are often able to offer lower prices and still be profitable. So thus, under the right circumstances, a low cost leader strategy is a viable alternative for some new ventures. And the way most companies achieve low cost leadership, however, is typically different for young or small firms. If we recall from Chapter 5, the business level strategy, that three of the features of a low-cost approach includes operating at a large enough scale to spread costs over many units of production, which we call the economies of scale, making substantial capital investment in order to increase scale economies, and using knowledge gained from experience to make cost-saving improvements. So these elements, I think, of a cost leadership strategy may be unavailable to new ventures, because new ventures are typically small and they usually don't have high economies of scale if compared to uh, stable or established competitors in the market. All right, because they are usually strapped, they can't make large capital investment to increase their scale advantages. Yes? And because many are young, they often don't have a wealth of accumulated experience to draw on to achieve cost reduction. So with this constraint, how can a new venture successfully deploy the cost leader strategies? So compared to a large firm, new ventures often have simple organizational structures that make decision making both easier and faster. The smaller size also help young firms change more quickly when upgrades in technology or feedback from the marketplace indicates that improvement are needed. They are also able to make decisions at the time they are founded that help them deal with the issue of controlling costs. For example, they may source material from a supplier that provide them more cheaply, or set up manufacturing facilities in another country where the labor costs are especially low. So thus new firms have several avenues for achieving low cost leadership. So whatever method young firm use to achieve a low cost advantage, I think this has always been a way that entrepreneurial firm take business away from incumbents. So by offering a comparable product or service at a lower price. When come to the differentiation, both pioneering and adaptive entry strategy involve some degree of differentiation. So that is the new entry is based on being able to offer a differentiated value proposition. So in the case of pioneers, the new venture is attempting to do something strikingly different. Okay, either by using new technology or by deploying resources in a way that radically alters the way business is conducted. So often entrepreneur will do both. All right. There are several factors that make it more difficult for new ventures to be to be successful as differentiator. So for one thing, the strategy is generally thought to be expensive to enact. Differentiation is often associated with strong brand identity, and established a brand is usually considered to be expensive because of the cost of advertising and promotion, paid endorsement, exceptional customer service, and so on. So depreciation successes are sometimes built on superior innovation or use of technology. So these are also factors that might make it challenging for young firms to excel relative to established competitors. Nevertheless, I think all of these area, for example, the innovation, technology, customer service, distinctive branding are also areas where new ventures have sometimes made a name for themselves, even though they must operate with limited resources and experience. And the third one is focus, where focus strategies are often associated with small businesses because there is a natural fit between the narrow scope of the strategy and the small size of the firms. So focus strategy may include element of depreciation and overall cost leadership, as well as the combination of these approaches. But to be successful within a market niche, the key strategic requirement is to stay focused. Despite all the attention Despite all the attention given to the fast-growing new industries, most startup enter industries that are matures. So in mature industries, growth in demand tend to be slow and there are often many competitors. So therefore, if a startup wants to get a piece of the action, it often has to take business away from an existing competitors. If a startup enter a market with a broad or aggressive strategy, it is likely to evoke the retaliation from a more powerful competitors. So young firms can often succeed best by finding a market niche where they can get a foothold and make small advances that erode the position of existing competitors. So from this position, I think they can build a name for themselves and they can grow. A combination strategies for new venture. So one of the best way for young and small businesses to achieve success is by pursuing combination strategies. So by combining the best feature of low cost, differentiation and focus strategy, normally new ventures can often achieve something truly distinctive. Entrepreneurial firms are often in a strong position to offer a combination strategy because they have the flexibility to approach situation uniquely. For example, holding down expenses can be difficult for big firms because each layer of bureaucracy adds to the cost of doing business across the boundary of a large organization. And the similar argument I think could be made about entrepreneurial firms that differentiate. Large firms often find it difficult to offer highly specialized product or superior customer service. Entrepreneurial firms, by contrast, can often create high-value products and services through their unique differentiating efforts. So for nearly all new entrants, one of the major dangers here is that a large firm with more resources will copy what they are doing. So well-established incumbent that observe the success of a new entrant product or service will copy it and use their market power to overwhelm the smaller firm. So the threat may be lessened for firms that use combination strategy because of this flexibility of entrepreneurial firm. They can often enact combination strategies in ways that the large firms cannot copy. This where makes the new entrant strategies much more sustainable. Competitive dynamics. New entry into markets, whether by startup or by incumbents firm, nearly always threaten the existing competitors. This is actually true in parts because except in a very in a very new markets, nearly every market needs is already being met, okay, and either directly or indirectly by the existing firms. So as a result, the competitive action of a new entrants are very likely to provoke a competitive response from companies that feel threatened. So this in turn is likely to evoke a reaction to the response. As a result, a competitive dynamic action and response begins among the firms competing for the same customers in a given marketplace. Competitive dynamics actually it is intense rivalry among similar competitors has the potential to alter a company's strategy. The new entrant may be forced to change their strategies or develop new ones to survive competitive challenges by incumbent rival. So the new entry is actually among the most common reason why a cycle of competitive actions and reaction get started. It might also occur because of threatening action among existing competitors, such as aggressive cost cutting. And thus, when we study about this competitive dynamic, it would help to explain why strategies evolve and reveal how, why, and when to respond to the action of close competitors. This is the model of competitive dynamics. Okay, entry into a market by a new competitors is a good starting point to begin describing the cycle of actions and responses characteristic of competitive dynamic process. However, a new entry is only one type of competitive action. Price cutting, for example, imitating successful products and expanding production capacity are other examples of competitive act that might provoke the competitors to react. Why do company launch the new competitive actions? There are few reasons, which is to improve market position, to capitalize on a growing demand, to expand production capacity, to provide an innovative new solution, or even to obtain a first mover advantages. All right, underlying all of these reasons is a desire to strengthen the financial outcome. It can capture some of the extraordinary profit that industry leaders enjoy and grow the business. So some companies are also motivated to launch the competitive challenges just because they want to build their reputation for innovativeness or efficiency. If you look at Toyota, for example, Toyota's success with the Prius signal to its competitor the potential value of high fuel economy cars. And these firms have responded with their own hybrid electric cars and high efficiency diesel engine and even more fuel efficient the traditional gasoline engine. This is actually the indicative of the competitive dynamic cycle. When a company enters into a market for the first time, actually it is an attack on the existing competitors. So as indicated earlier in our previous slide, any of the entry strategy can be used to take competitive action, but the competitive attack come from many sources beside new entrant. Some of the most intense competition is among incumbent rivals intent on gaining the strategic advantages. Okay, the likelihood that a competitor will launch an attack depends on many factors. So in the remaining sections, we will look at we will discuss the factors such as competitor analysis, market condition, types of the strategic action, and the resource endowment and capabilities company need to take competitive action. Okay, now we look at the threat analysis. Prior to the observing a competitive action, companies may need to become aware of potential competitive threat. That is, companies need to have a keen sense of who their closest competitors are and the kinds of competitive actions they might be planning. This may require some environmental scanning and monitoring of the sort that we have learned in chapter 2. So awareness of the threat that posed by industry rival allows firms to understand what type of competitive response, if any, that may be necessary for them, right? So being aware of competitors and the cognizance of whatever threat they might pose is the first step in assessing the level of competitive threats. So once a new competitive action becomes apparent, companies must determine how threatening it is to their business. So competitive dynamics actually are likely to be most intense among companies that are competing for the same customers, as I mentioned earlier. So they might have a similar sets of resources. So there are two factors that need to be considered if you want to assess whether or not the companies are close competitors or not. All right, so we look at the market commonality and also the resource similarity. So market commonality is actually whether or not the competitors are vying for the same customers and how many markets they share in common. For example, aircraft manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus, they have a high degree of market commonality because they make very similar product and have many buyers in common. And if we study about the resource similarity, the degree to which rival draws on the same types of resources to compete. Very simple. If we look at the Huawei and Nokia, they are the telecommunications equipment providers. They are that are based in different continents and have different histories, but they have patent rights to similar technologies, high quality engineering staff, and also the global sales force. When any two firms have both a high degree of market commonality and highly similar resource bases, strong competitive threat is present. Such a threat, however, may not lead to competitive actions. On the other hand, a market rival may be hesitant to attack a company that it shares a high degree of market commonality, just because it could lead to an intense battle. And once attacked, so rival with a high market commonality will be much more motivated to launch a competitive response. So this is especially true in cases where the shared market is an important part of a company's overall business. So how strong a response and attack rival can mount will be determined by its strategic resource endowment. So in general, the same set of condition holds true with regard to resource similarity. Companies that have high similar resource bases will be hesitant to launch an initial attack, but pose a serious threat if required to mount a competitive response. So greater strategic resources increase a firm's capability to respond. Motivation and capability to respond. Alright, so once attacked, competitors are faced with deciding how to respond. So before deciding, however, they need to evaluate not only how they will respond, but also the reasons for responding and their capability to respond. Okay, the companies need to be clear about what problems a competitive response is expected to address and what type of problems it might create. There are several factors that need to be considered. Okay, the first one is how serious is the impact of the competitive attack to which they are responding. For example, a large company with a strong reputation that is challenged by a small or unknown company might elect to simply keep an eye on the new competitor rather than quickly react or overreact. Companies planning to respond to a competitive challenge must also understand their motivation for responding. So, what is the intent of the competitive response? Is it merely to blind attack of the competitors, or is it an opportunity to enhance its competitive position? Sometimes the most of a company can hope for is to minimize the damage caused by a competitive actions. A company that seeks to improve its competitive advantage may be motivated to launch an attack rather than merely respond to one. A company must also assess its capability to respond. Okay, what strategic resources can be deployed to fend off a competitive attack? So, does the company have an array of internal strength it can draw on, or is it operating from a position of weakness? So, consider the role of a firm age and size in calculating a company's ability to respond. most entrepreneurial new ventures start out small. So the smaller size makes them more, I think, nimble compared to large firm. So they can respond quickly to competitive attack because they are not known. Startups also have the advantage of the element of surprise in how and when they attacks. Innovative uses of technology, for example, allow the small firms to deploy resources in unique ways. Because they are young, however, startup may not have the financial resources needed to follow through with a competitive response. So, in contrast, older and larger firms may have more resources and repertoire of competitive techniques that they can use in a counter-attack the small firm. So large firms normally tend to be slower to respond. Older firms tend to be predictable in their responses just because they often lose touch with the competitive environment and rely on strategies and action that have worked in the past. Other resources may also play roles in whether a company is equipped to retaliate. For example, one of avenue of counter attack may be launching product enhancement or new product service innovation. So in order for that approach to be successful, I think it's require a company to have both the intellectual capital to put forward viable innovation and the teamwork skills to prepare a new product or service and get it to market. Resources such as cross-functional teams and the social capital that makes teamwork production effective and efficient represent the type of human capital resources that would enhance a company capability to respond. Okay, now we look at these types of competitive action. Once an organization determine whether it is willing and able to launch a competitive action, it must determine what type of action is appropriate. So the actions taken will be determined by both its resource capability and also motivation for responding. There are also marketplace consideration and what types of action are likely to be most effective given a company internal strength and weaknesses as well as market condition. Uh, Two types of competitive actions include the strategic action and tactical action. The strategic action represent the major commitments of distinctive and specific resources, which include launching a breakthrough um, innovation, building a new production facility, or merging with another company. Where such action requires significant planning and resources, and once initiated, it is a bit difficult to reverse. Okay, whereby the tactical action include refinement or the extension of the existing strategies. For example, of tactical action will include the cutting prices, improving gaps in service, or uh, maybe strengthening the marketing effort. And these such action typically draw on general resources and can be implemented quickly. Now we look at the likelihood of competitive reaction. This is the final step before initiating a competitive response is to evaluate what a competitor's reaction is likely to be. So the logic of competitive dynamic suggests that once competitive action are initiated, it is likely they will be met with competitive responses. The last step before mounting an attack is to evaluate the how competitors are likely to respond. So maybe these evaluating the potential competitive reactions would help companies plan for future counterattack, and it may also lead to a decision to hold off. That's it. That is not to take any competitive action at all because of the possibility that a misguided or poorly planned response will generate a devastating competitive reaction. So how a competitor is likely to respond will depend on three factors. One is market dependence, right? The competitive resources and the reputation of the firm that initiate the action, which is called the actor's reputation, and the implication of each of these are explained later, right? So we look at the market dependent first. If a company has a high concentration of its business in a particular industry, it has more at stake because it must depend on that particular industry markets for its sale. So single industry businesses, or those where one industry dominates, are more likely to mount a competitive response. And this young and small firm with a high degree of market dependence may be limited in how they respond due to resource constraint. And if you look at these competitors' resources, um, previously we examined the internal resource endowment that a company must evaluate when assessing its capability to respond, right? So here it is the competitors' resources that need to be considered. For example, small firms may be unable to mount a serious attack due to the lack of resources, and this will result more likely to react to tactical action such as incentive pricing or enhanced service that you can offer to the existing customers or your new customers, and because they are less costly to attack than large-scale strategic action. So in contrast, firms with financial deep pocket may be able to mount and sustain a costly counter attack. And when it comes to the actor's repetition here, whether a company should respond to a competitive challenge will also depend on who launched the attack, who launched the attack against it. So compared to relatively smaller firm with less market power. All right, the competitors are more likely to respond to competitive move by market leaders. So another consideration is how successful prior attack have been. You may look at the price cutting by the big automakers, for example. It usually has the desired result: increased sales to price sensitive buyers, at least in the short run. And whether to choosing not to react, choosing not to respond, or not to react, it's a choice, and it is include a forbearance and competition. Okay, based on the discussion earlier, it suggests that there may be many circumstances in which the best reaction is no reaction at all. Right, so this is known as forbearance. Okay, a refraining from reacting at all, as well as holding back from initiating an attack. So the decision of whether a firm should respond or show forbearance is not always clear. So another related things to forbearance is the concept of competition. Okay, this is a term that was coined by network software company, the novel founder and former CEO Raymond, to suggest that company often benefit most from a combination of competing and cooperating. So where here we look at the close competitors that differentiate themselves in the eyes of consumer may work together behind the scenes to achieve industry-wide efficiencies. All right, so um, normally they negotiate promises to buy certain quantity of the the product of competitors company, and they will gain the benefit from the cooperating. That's what we call the competition. So, despite the potential benefit of competition, companies need to guard against cooperating to such a great extent that their actions are perceived as collusion. Okay, so that's one thing that we have to look into as well when we discuss about the reactions of the competitors. In summary, once a company has evaluated a competitor's likelihood of responding to a competitive challenge, it can decide what type of action is most appropriate. So the competitive actions can take many forms of the entry of a startup into a market for the first time, an attack by a lower rank incumbent on an industry leader, or the launch of a breakthrough innovation that disrupt the industry structure. So such actions forever change the competitive dynamic of a marketplace. So thus the cycle of action and reaction that occur in business every day is a vital aspect of entrepreneurial strategy that leads to continual new value creation and ongoing advancement of economic well-being. When we discuss about the entrepreneurial strategy, it will involve new value creation, and we have discussed the threat about the existing competitors, the changes, the competitive dynamic of the marketplace. So we also have to look at the entrepreneurial activity which involve risks, and how should the companies enter a market, and how should they compete, and how should they deal with the competitors reaction. So with that, I end chapter 8, and I hope you have a better understanding on the entrepreneurial strategy and the competitive dynamic. We will try to look at the final exam question and a few cases to be discussed together. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.